flipping heck. I'm going to shift this because I'll fall over it and I'll trigger the health and safety rules. Can we just put our hands together for this amazing worship band? Thank you, folks. Although I do have to confess, when I was watching some of the darts earlier, that guitar was at risk. It really was. So, could you put my first one up if you could, Izzy, please? That's me, as Stephen has quite rightly said. Everybody calls me Gasky. If you call me Paul and I ignore you, please forgive me, but everybody calls me Gasky, even my grandkids. They don't call me Grandad either. They call me Pops because I'm not responsible enough to be Grandad. So you're getting a flavour for where I'm coming from, aren't you? So as Stephen says, I represent a national organisation called Christian Vision for Men. And why men? But this is a quote from a lady, and she said, every Christian woman would want her man to be in a relationship with Jesus. And every Christian man with a daughter or daughters would want her or them to meet a man who's in a relationship with Jesus. And I think we all agree with that. And that's my passion. As you can see, I've got the rather grand title of Regional Director for England North, which sounds grand. It isn't. Technically, my patch starts at Milton Keynes because it's in the north. And I work right up until the borders with this beautiful country of yours, Scotland. And having said that, next week I'm down in Essex, and then I'm down in the Isle of Wight. How further north can you get? And I'm across at Great Yarmouth in Norfolk, would you believe? And in April this year, I was in Lanzarote with Christian Vision for Men. And I'm still trying to convince my wife that it was work. But so I've pretty much got free rein to go everywhere. Hit the next one if you would, please, Izzy. And the next one. Thank you. So there is a couple of leaflets and stuff on the back near where Elizabeth is sitting. And that explains what we're about. Or you can get on the QR code there. And that will give you a little flavour of what we're about as a movement. And if you could hit the next one, please, Izzy. Have I got one? Yeah. We do have some resources. It's all online, and I'll just direct you to our resources. So all designed to help you, with confidence, look your mate in the eye and tell him about his Saviour. Because as far as I'm concerned, that's the best thing that any man could do for another fella. And that's what I'm about. That's my passion. So just by way of introduction, my background is as a police officer. I was a police officer. Normally people throw things now. I was a police officer in my home county of Leicestershire for 30 years. And I retired in 2011 after 30 years service. And I thought then, well, now I can be a gentleman of leisure. I can take up lunchtime drinking. Perhaps I can catch up on the decorating jobs that I promised my wife I would do one day. But as I always say to Sue, you never rush a craftsman. So try that when you get home. Let me know how you get on. So try that one. Or I thought I could play golf. I used to play a lot of golf. Any golfers in here? One or two golfers. I used to play a lot of golf. I used to play off an 8 handicap, I'm told, which is quite good. So I thought I could do that again. But 6 days after retirement, I went back to work for the Leicestershire Police, and I worked in counter-terrorism. And as Stephen's just alluded to, I had the privilege of leading Chris Hardy, neo-Nazi, right-wing chap, to his saviour. And the net effect of that Chris has been used by God to reach thousands of other people. Thousands. And that's all. Ain't God great? Ain't he great? He's great. So with 35 years or so working in law enforcement, it has taught me one or two things about men. And I know you're thinking, did he join when he was 9? You are, aren't you? Yeah, of course. Thanks, Dan. I've always liked you. In that police career, I've worked in pretty much every sort of arena going, and I'll tell you a bit more in a moment. But I've been stabbed twice. I won't show you where because we have got some family audience in. I've been shot at. Thankfully, it missed. And I've had my nose broken more times than I care to remember. And you can probably tell by my good looks. That's happened a lot. But I've learnt a lot about fellas. And I want to start today by really going back to the beginning. And as a kid, I had no church upbringing. I was the youngest of 3. My mum and dad, we lived in quite a deprived area in Leicester. And if I say we didn't have a lot, we didn't have a lot. Okay? And I was as far away from church and faith and all that stuff as I think anybody could be. My mum and dad sent me to Sunday school, but I think the motivation for that was to get me out of the way rather than introduce me to Jesus. And I think for a lot of kids in the 60s that applied. It might also explain why I do have a brother and a sister. I don't know. But, you know, who knows? So I went through the educational system. I was a pretty average sort of kid. And my big passion was playing football. And as Stephen has so eloquently described, I follow the greatest team in the world. Thank you, Leicester City. And as a kid, that was my passion. I played football, and I did actually make the grade to play for Leicester City Youth. And I played alongside somebody you may have heard of called Gary Lineker. Yeah, but Gary made the grade, and me, well, I didn't. Mainly because my love for football was quickly replaced by alcohol, tobacco, and women. Not necessarily in that order, but I discovered other things in life that took me away from playing football. Plus, I wasn't good enough, to be fair. So that was that. So I joined the Leicestershire Police age 21, and it wasn't long before I got headhunted to go into a plain clothes role in the CID, in the Criminal Investigation Department, because I'd built up a reputation as being a bit of a thief taker, and I was headhunted to go in and work in specialist crime. And they do say it takes one to catch one. Never a truer word has been said. And I must give a disclaimer now, because in the 80s and 90s, policing was very different to how it is today. I must stress that. I wouldn't last 5 minutes now. I must stress that. But very early on in my service, as I say, I got headhunted to go into the CID. And I really thought I'd arrived. I really thought I'd arrived. And despite being married to my beautiful wife, Sue, and we were blessed with 2 amazing daughters, I pretty much behaved like a single bloke. And I did all sorts of things that single blokes tend to do. So I worked long hours, 12, 14, 16 hours a day. When I wasn't at work, you could guarantee I'd be down the pub socialising with the boys. And I wasn't a dad to my kids. I was a father from the point I provided, but I wasn't a dad. I didn't go to any parents' evenings. I didn't go to any school productions. I didn't go to anything like that because my focus was purely on the job that I was involved in. And I was the best detective in our office. And that became my drive. So I had the best arrest rate. I had the best detection rate. I had the most number of informants. So they're people who you recruit, criminals who you recruit to tell you stuff. Call them grasses, snouts, call them what you like. I had the most number of that. And I was Charlie Bananas, big style. I was the man in the office. I was the detective. To the detriment of my wife and family. I didn't give them a second thought. And I'm really deeply ashamed to say that. But in the late 80s, early 90s, as a force, Leicestershire was, I'll use the word unfortunate, it's perhaps not very accurate, but we were unfortunate enough to have a number of murder investigations which seemed to happen back to back. And every time we had a murder inquiry, it was the policy to pull a team of detectives from around the force area to form the incident room, and we dealt with whatever we had to deal with. And every time it happened, I was crewed up with a guy. His name was Tim. And Tim was such a top bloke. He was a right laugh. The banter we shared was incredible. And just to give you a flavour of that, everybody smoked in our office. Back in the day, I was a real heavy smoker. I was sharing last night with Stephen and Elizabeth. I was quite a heavy smoker back in the day, as were all of us who worked in CID. And if you just picture this, some suspect interviews, I smoked, my colleague smoked, the suspect smoked, the solicitor smoked, the social worker smoked, the appropriate adult smoked. So after a 45-minute interview, we had to stop the interview because we couldn't see each other. It's true, you know? You can imagine. So Tim was a top bloke. We used to go drinking together. He thought he could drink me under the table. He tried many times and failed. And we were like that. And I think when you work with somebody in that close proximity for 12, 14, 16 hours a day, as I say, you get to know somebody. Or you think you do, don't you? You get to know somebody. So we're really busy. We're working on murder inquiry after murder inquiry. We're doing long hours. We're earning a lot of money because we're on overtime. We're spending a lot of money as well because that's what we did. And I went to work one Saturday, 1995. Hungover again. My detective inspector called me in the office and he said, Gask, you better sit down. And I said, why? He said, there's no easy way to tell you, but last night, Tim took his own life. Now, we used to joke, Tim and I, that the next murder inquiry, and this is not funny, but the next murder inquiry we're assigned to will drag the body just outside of Leicestershire so that they've got to deal with it and not us, which is not funny, but, you know, that's what we used to say. And Tim actually took his own life 100 yards across the border into Warwickshire. And only I knew that. Now, in those days, there was not much available for counselling or welfare. The answer to everything was, come on, we'll have a beer and we'll be all right. Well, that wasn't really helping me. So the way I dealt with and that's a very ironic phrase to use, I didn't deal with Tim's death very well at all. And the way I felt manifested itself into outbursts of rage and anger. I became a very, very angry man because I couldn't cope with what I was going through. I started to drink really heavily, and I'm talking about half a bottle of whiskey with my cornflakes. How I kept my job, I don't know. But we all wear masks, don't we, fellas? We all mask stuff. How I kept my job, I don't know. And the only way I can describe this as I felt in so much pain that the only time I wasn't in pain was when I was asleep. But I couldn't sleep because of anxiety and stress and fear and every other emotion that I couldn't handle. So I thought, well, if I can't sleep, I'll try to induce sleep any way I can. So if that meant drinking some more, then I drank some more. And when that didn't work, I started to dabble with substances you don't buy across the counter at Boots, because I just wanted to be asleep. But I couldn't sleep, as I say. So at this time, my wife can see that her husband is going down the toilet. And I wasn't just pressing the self-destruct button, I was leaning on it. And she could see that. So I was spiraling downhill. And the way the anger manifested itself, I'll give you two quick examples. I was a CID officer. CID officers and traffic officers don't go together, you know? They don't mix. Now, don't do this, it's not big, it's not clever, but I've done it. I used to regularly drink too much alcohol and drive. Because if I got stopped by the police, it would be, I'm in the CID, do one. Because that's what it was like in the culture of the day. So word was put out by a traffic officer that for Christmas, I'm going to breathalyse a detective, and it's going to be Paul Gask. I'm going to have him. So word got back to me that, I won't tell you his name, it's not fair. Word got back to me, be careful, mate, because he's after you. So one night, I went in the bar when police stations had bars. I went in the bar with my CID colleagues, and this fella was there with all his traffic colleagues. There he was. And I didn't say anything. I just walked up to him and I punched him as hard as I could. And he went down like a sack of potatoes. And then I jumped on him and I battered him. And I really did give him a good hiding. Now, what started off as, well done, Gask, he asked for that, quickly became, hang on a minute, this is getting out of hand. And when I was interviewed about this cop never made a complaint. I put him in hospital. He never made a complaint. Had he done, I wouldn't be standing here now, and I would have lost my job and probably gone to prison. But when I was interviewed, they said, how many times did you hit him? And I said, 4 or 5. And they said, well, all the witnesses are there, say they lost count at 35, 40 plus times. I could have killed him. And I'm thinking, hang on a minute, you're losing it. You're losing it. And another very quick example, I was interviewing, I spent 10 years working in a department which dealt with mainly men who commit offences against women and children. I did that for 10 years. It was supposed to be a specialism. That's probably a bit of an overstatement, but I worked in that arena. And myself and my detective sergeant were interviewing this old boy for historical abuse he'd committed against his own kids, who were now in the 40s. So we had teams of detectives interviewing them, they were feeding us, and we were interviewing this bloke. Full-on day of interviewing. Real stressful day. And towards the end of a very, very long day of interviews, word got to us from our interview teams that this bloke had started to abuse his grandkids. So me being me, I walked into that interview room and I just took him by the throat and I picked him up and got him against the wall and I said, just give me one reason why I shouldn't put your face through this wall. Which is not the thing to say when his defence solicitor is sitting next to him. So I was losing it. I really was losing the plot. And I was spiralling downhill. And I was not really at home. And I stayed at work. And I was drinking. And Some Saturday mornings or Sunday mornings, I'd wake up, look out of my bedroom window, and my car looked like it had been stolen and abandoned. It was parked across the drive at an angle with the door open, and I say to Sue, "Who's done that?" She said, "You did." No recollection. I was losing it. So I made the decision, and I worked this out, and it's as simple as this. I worked it out. If I am permanently asleep, I won't be in any more pain. And that's it. It's as simple as that. I was blinkered. People say to me, "But you've got a wife, you've got kids, you've got a good job, you've got this." Irrelevant. All I was focusing on was me. If I'm permanently asleep, I won't be in any more pain. So I decided to take my own life. Now, I didn't tell anybody. I never left any notes. I just decided that I was going to end it. So on New Year's Eve, going into 1996, I decided that I would jump from a railway bridge in the centre of Leicester. And the reason I decided to jump was because I've seen people who jump, and when you hit the floor, you explode. So I knew I'd do a proper job. I'm a bit of a coward, really. I didn't want to feel any pain in that respect. I knew it would be instant. So I decided to jump. And it's bizarre, really, because it's New Year's Eve. People are partying, they're happy, they're looking forward to the new year, and I felt wretched. I felt lost and abandoned and wretched. So I thought, that is my only option now. So I climbed onto the bridge of this railway line, over this railway line, and when I was one step from going over, I became aware of an inner voice, which I wrote off as conscience. And this voice said, "Paul, don't do this. Just remember how angry you were when Tim took his own life. Don't do it." And I wrote it off as conscience. But I got off the wall, and I was really, really in a mess. Slightly to backtrack, when I announced to my wife that I was going to leave before this sort of suicide attempt, when I announced that I was leaving, Sue, my wife, had just become a Christian. And I clearly remember the night she came home from an event in the city, and she told me she'd given her life to Christ. And I thought, well, that's it now then, because I'm even further down the pecking order. So I accused her of poisoning the minds of our kids. And amongst her church friends, I had the reputation of not just being the angry bloke, but I was known as that man who occasionally speaks between swearing. Because I used to like to rev them up. I could rev them up. These do-good Christians, I could get them going, or I thought I could. So I deliberately tried to wind them up. So, knowing that her husband was going down the pan, Sue confided in our vicar, "My husband's in a mess." Our vicar said, "Let me go and talk to him." She kept saying, "The time's not right, because if you do, he's likely to assault you." And that's where I was. So on the night I announced I was leaving, Sue was taking our girls, they were 9 and 7 at the time, she'd taken our girls to a pantomime. And I said, "When you come back, I won't be here." Sue still took our daughters to the pantomime because she'd promised. But on the way round to see this pantomime, she nipped into the vicarage and said, "Now's the time to go round." So as I am loading my worldly possessions into my into my car, which was incidentally a Lada Riva, high life, keep your Audis, Lada Riva. As I'm loading my possessions into my car, this little clergyman turned up. And Tony, I love him dearly, he's retired now. Tony is about 4 foot and a fag paper. And he turned up, and I thought, you're all I need. You're all I need. and I couldn't get rid of him. I tried to use every single word of Anglo-Saxon that I possessed to get rid of him. And I made some up as well, but he wouldn't go. And eventually I said to him, I said, look, Tony, when I'm sorted out, I'll come and see you. And he said, right, now you've said that, if I said to you, I'll come and see you, and I didn't, you'd call me a hypocrite. I said, yeah. He said, so you've got to come and see me. And I said, yeah, I will, thinking, no intentions of seeing you again. So he cleared off anyway. So after my unsuccessful suicide attempt, I was wandering around the streets of Leicester for 3 days until I found myself at the door of our vicarage. And the door opened, and there stood Tony. And he went, you're all right. Well, he didn't. He went, you're all right, mate. Like that. And he invited me in, and I couldn't talk. I couldn't talk for an hour. I was crying. And I mean a proper bloke's cry. You know, snot and everything. A proper bloke's cry. I was sobbing uncontrollably. And he said to me, what's your plans? I said, I haven't got any plans. I said, I didn't even plan to be alive today. So he said, well, what if you go home? I said, I can't. How can I go home? I put my wife through hell. I really did. I said, I can't go. I've started divorce proceedings. I can't go home. I can't. He said, well, we'll see what happens, shall we? Now, and I wasn't man enough to go to my marital home on my own. I had to hold the hand of this little clergyman. So it's like this, you know. I had to hold the hand of this little clergyman, and he took me to my home, and Sue opened the door. Now, Sue will be here at lunchtime, and I would ask that you do have a word. She's here now. I would ask that you do have a word with her, because her side of our story is incredible. She is, in human terms, Sue is my hero in my story. She is. So there I am, standing at the door of our house, and Sue allowed us in. And praise God, she allowed me back into her life. But it didn't come easy. She would tell you herself, when I left, she had a dream that I was singing in a Christian rock band. I've done that. Somewhere in a charity bin, you'll probably find CDs by a band called Eye to Eye. That's me. Use them as bird scarers or whatever you need to do with them now. She dreamt that I was working for a Christian organisation, and she dreamt that I was sort of preaching God's word in church. Bearing in mind, I'm a mess and I've gone. And she felt obliged and compelled to read a passage from 2 Corinthians in the Bible, which talks about marriage. And I'll have to paraphrase this because I'm no theologian, but it basically said, if your unbelieving husband leaves, let him leave in peace. You never know, wife, how you handle this might not only bring him back to you, but bring him back to me. And she clung on to that and allowed me back into her life. But, and it is a big but, I sat with her and I told her that I'd contemplated suicide. So she's straight on the phone to our GP. Our GP was a member of our church. So you see where this is going, don't you? So I'm dispatched to see my GP. The GP says, you need an urgent mental health assessment. And he said to Sue, if you can't take him, I'm going to get an ambulance because it's that serious. So I didn't get an ambulance. I was poured into the car. Sue drove me to a hospital, which is now closed, but to a mental health assessment unit there. And I always remember walking down towards these doors. It was like a big polytunnel. And the unit I was going to be assessed at was at the bottom. And as I walked down, I said to Sue, if they try to admit me, I'm going to kick off. I said, I'm going to really kick off because I was angry. And she said, we'll worry about that if we have to. I said, I'll tell you now, I'm going to kick off. Anyway, as I walked down this corridor, this door opened and this massive fella stood there. It was a massive member of staff. And I looked at him and I thought, well, if I go in with as much violence as I can, I might take him out. And this is going through my mind. And then another door opened the other side, and I thought, flipping heck, it's his twin brother. He was massive. And then two other equally big blokes appeared, and I thought, this is one you're not going to win, Gasky. So I went through this assessment, and to cut a very long story short, I was diagnosed with suffering from severe clinical depression. And I was put on the sick, prescribed some medication, and the parting words of my psychiatrist, psychologist, head doctor type professional person, his parting words were, if you want to save your marriage, you've got to tell your wife exactly what you've done. I thought, I can't. I thought, how can I look my wife in the eye and tell her why we're £15,000 in debt? Because most of that had gone up my nose. How can I tell my wife about an away fixture that I've had? And I don't have to explain any more than that, do I? How can I tell her? But I knew I had to. And the best bit of theology I have ever heard, and this is not biblical, but the best bit of theology I've ever heard, and our good friend Graham Swanee said this, and he's so true. He said, a good confession is like a good puke. It makes a heck of a mess, but it's better out. James in the Bible puts it a little bit better than that, but I think you get where I'm coming from. So I had to make these revelations, and of course, Sue allowed me back into her life. And she said, will you come to church? And I said, no. My opinions of church, particularly men in church, was less than positive. And, you know, when I went to church for the mandatory baptisms, funerals and weddings, I just found them irrelevant. They seemed to be full of old people. The blokes in the church seemed to wear really sort of sensible sweaters, and they wore socks and sandals. Anyway, and they sang songs about loving another bloke. And there was lots of flowers and there was lots of tapestries. And in the Church of England tradition, the bloke running the thing wore a dress. And I thought, hang on, last night I was rolling around and somebody was trying to kill me. And this is all irrelevant. And what happened, and I'm going to use you as an example, sir. We've not met. After your guitar riff this morning, if it's okay, I want to call you Slash. Is that all right? So, Slash, come up here. There was a bloke came up to me in church, and he at the bit in the church service called the peace, he shook me by the hand. And he went, peace be with you. But then he went, no, it's the dove of peace. Thank you very much.
No worries.
Thank you for not... Yeah. So, I'm going to bring this into land because, thank you for that. That's why I found church irrelevant. So Sue said to me, I'd been on the sick for a few weeks and I was on medication. Sue said to me, will you come to church? We're having a church social bring and share evening, because we're good at them, aren't we? We'll have a bring and share evening, will you come? And I didn't want to go, but I had to get loads of brownie points back. You know, I was trying to save things. So I said, yes, I'll go. And we're walking round to the vicarage. And I said, the first bloke who says something, I'm going to take him outside and I'm going to give him a slap. And Sue said, nobody will say anything. And I said, they will. Somebody will say something. And I turned up at this event and I met a load of Christian men. And in those 2 or 3 hours, I worked out that these were some of the strongest men I'd ever met. And what really struck me, and every single one of us in this room can do this, fellas, Nobody judged me. Nobody judged me. And they all knew what had happened, but nobody judged me. And it just completely took the wind out of my sails because I was expecting it. And nobody did. So we went home, went to bed, I went to sleep with some pleasant thoughts for a change. And then I had what I can only describe as my worst nightmare ever. And I'm not easily intimidated, but this was the most frightening experience of my life. In my dream, I was being pulled between two forces. On one side, it was black, nothing. On the other side, there was a tiny speck of light. And I was being pulled between the two to such an extent, I really believed that I was going to be torn in two. And unbeknown to me, Sue is praying over me. I didn't know. I was out the game. Sue's praying over me. And I was tossing about in bed and I was screaming out. I was going through this experience. Sue's praying. After this titanic battle I was going through, the darkness let go of me. And I was propelled towards this light, which got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until it was released into a pure blinding light. A pure light. And I sat up, I woke up, I was wet through with sweat, and I was trying to confused and trying to work out what I'd just experienced. Sue decides, now is the time to fetch a copy of the Why Jesus booklet that she'd hidden in her sewing basket downstairs. So she goes downstairs, and then I become aware of another presence in our bedroom. And in the corner of our bedroom, a figure held out his hands towards me in the gloom and said, Paul, just trust me. And I knew it was Jesus. I just knew it was Jesus. And you think, being a 35-year cop, I'd be able to say, well, he's about 5'10". He's got a bit of a beard. But I can't do that, and it's not a cop-out, excuse the pun. That's not a cop-out. The only way I can describe him is pure peace. So at 1:10 a.m. on Sunday, the 3rd of March, 1996, my life was transformed. And that started me on a journey, which is now taking me to where I am today. But I had to go back to work. I had 4 months on the sick, and I went back to work. Back to the CID, back to that sort of banter, back to that culture. I walked back in, and I could have been a little bit more subtle, because I went in and I said, gentlemen, whilst I've been off, I've met the risen Lord Jesus Christ. And they said, Gasky, since you've been off with a mental health problem, we don't think you should be back. So they really did take the wee-wee. Really did take the wee-wee. I was going to say something else, but my wife's sitting there. They really took the mickey, so to speak, if you're familiar with that phrase. And I went in one morning and my desk was covered. I've got another minute and a half. Brilliant. My desk was covered with a purple cloth with a candle on each corner, like some sort of altar. And we had a tannoy system that was audible in our car park. And I parked my car one morning at the police station to be greeted by 1,000 decibels of onward Christian soldiers. So you can imagine some of the stuff that I did. But that's fine. But I'm going to end with a quick story as well, because I think I can squeeze it in. But because I've had such a revelation of the risen Lord Jesus Christ like that, because I have and you haven't, that doesn't mean that he's got any more favor on me than he has you. I want to point that out, yeah? My faith is no better than yours if you've not experienced something like that. But what I do know is, I am not the man I should be, but I'm not the man I was. And I would say to all of you here today, don't leave this place today the same man as when you came in. Start that process of the man you know you should be. And I want to finish with a very quick story, and I've got 30 seconds. I was getting to the stage, unwittingly, of getting sucked into this world of Christian celebrity status, you know, and it came on the back of speaking at big events like New Wine and Spring Harvest and the big events. And I got asked to speak at a breakfast in Lancaster. which is not a million miles away. It is when you live in Leicester and you've got to get to Lancaster for an 8:30 breakfast. And they said, will you come and speak? I said, yeah, come and speak at our breakfast. I turned up. There were 6 Christian men for breakfast. 6. And where I'm from, we call that having the hump. I had the hump. And the breakfast wasn't the best breakfast I've ever had. It was one little bit of bacon in one of them tiny rolls you get from Aldi's. All the supermarkets are available, but, you know. And that was it. So now I had the raging hump. And I thought, well, you're here, just do what you've been asked to do. So I shared a bit about my story. There was a bloke there named Pete. Pete burst into tears, and they're saying to him, church men. They said to Pete, Pete, what is it? And he said, none of you know this, but I've been suspended from my job. He worked at Lancaster University. He said, I've been suspended from my job, and it's caused so much stress. My wife's left me. So in the boot of my car is some rope that I bought because I was going to end my life this week. But now I know there's some hope, and that's not going to happen. And I had to get in my car and say, Lord, I'm really sorry. Because if he says to me, I want you to drive 230 miles and have a bacon sandwich with a bloke who needs to hear about me, not you, needs to hear about me, you'll do it, won't you? And I'll learn a massive lesson from that. So, gents, don't leave here the same man you came in. Start that journey in the man you know you should be. And I've run out of time, and I appreciate your patience. Bless you all. Thank you.